our shir will concern a topic I think that is of interest to everybody. I do a lot of source citations as we learn about various different topics, and I'm constantly quoting this type of text or that author, and I imagine that people wonder exactly how to place what they're hearing in time and who said what and who are these people and why does it matter. So this shir is going to help us to understand the various components of Torah and also how the timeline of commentary and what we call perushim unfolds through the centuries. We have to understand that there is basically a descending chain of authority as we move from the initial event of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai until we get to the present day. So let's launch into this and understand this topic better. One of the most fundamental questions that comes up when approaching the Torah is the Torah simply a book of laws? For someone new to Torah study, especially Noahites who are just getting into Torah study, seeking to draw closer to Hashem, this question can shape the entire approach to the text. We know that the Torah contains hundreds of mitzvot, hundreds of commandments, and yet much of its content is devoted to stories. And not only stories, but we have genealogies and historical accounts. For example, why does the Torah choose to begin with in the beginning and then describing the process of creation, and not with the first mitzvah that's given to Israel? Why is the narrative portion of the Torah so expansive if the goal is to instruct humanity in divine law? So the Torah is more than a legal code. Its narratives shape our understanding of Hashem's relationship with the world, of humanity's purpose, and of the moral framework that underpins divine law. This fusion of story and commandment invites us into a more holistic engagement with Torah because it emphasizes not just what we must do, but who we are meant to become. For Noahides, this perspective provides a gateway to a deeper spiritual connection and an alignment with the divine will. We're going to explore now the dual nature of the Torah as a book of both narrative and law, and uncover its implications for B'nai Noach. When we delve into classical sources such as Rashi, Rambam, Mishnah, will illustrate how the Torah's stories provide context for the laws that the Torah commands. Also, will demonstrate that Noahides, though bound by fewer mitzvot, are no less connected to the grand narrative of Torah. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Pun intended. Rashi, who is probably the most foremost Rishon, medieval commentator on the Torah itself, on the Torah text, begins his commentary on the Torah with a powerful question. In his explanation of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, Rashi quotes Rabbi Yitzchak, who asks why the Torah did not start with Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, which is the commandment to observe Rosh Chodesh. It's the first commandment given to the Jewish people. There it says, this month shall be for you the first of the months, etc. Meaning, what's the question here? If the Torah is primarily a book of law, why not begin with the law? Why introduce the text with the story of creation? Actually, quoting Rabbi Yitzchak, answers that the Torah starts with, in the beginning, Breshit bara Elokim, to establish God's sovereignty over the world. The verse from Psalms 111, verse 6, is there cited. He has declared the power of his works to his people in order to give them the inheritance of nations. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak is speaking 2,000 years ago, and he says that at some point in time, there's going to be a dispute over who owns this land. And the nations of the world will get up and say, Listim atem, you are robbers, because you have stolen the land of the seven nations being the seven Canaanite nations that at one point inhabited the land of Israel. In other words, the Torah's narrative establishes that God created the world, and as creator, he owns the world, and he has the authority to give the land of Israel to whomever he sees fit to give it. He took the land from these people and gave it to the Jewish people. So this serves as a response to the nations who might otherwise accuse Israel of unjustly seizing the land of Canaan. If that sounds familiar, it's almost like prophecy coming from Rabbi Yitzchak, if it's not prophecy in and of itself. 2,000 years ago, this is what he was telling us. Now, for Noahides, this insight carries immense significance because it highlights that the Torah is not just about legal obligations, but about faith, morality, and understanding the nature of the world and Hashem's governance of the world. By studying the narrative, we engage the fundamental recognition of Hashem's dominion over the world, and we lay the groundwork for fulfilling the mitzvot with deeper faith and awareness. Now, important to come out of the narrative is the question of moral character. It's an interesting thing that essentially there are 613 mitzvot, or 7 mitzvot that are observed by B'nai Noach. These mitzvot don't legislate character traits. We find that elsewhere. We find that in the narrative. Rav Chaim Vital, in his work Shari Kedusha, presents an amazing teaching about the nature of personality traits. He explains that within the human soul, there are foundational characteristics, both positive and negative, that influence a person's ability to fulfill the commandments. These traits, Rav Vital explains, are not counted amongst the 613 mitzvot, but they serve as the groundwork for the fulfillment of the mitzvot. Why is this relevant to Noahides? Because even though the 7 Noahide laws might seem simple in comparison to the extensive 613 mitzvot for Israel, the refinement of character is critical no matter what kind of person you are. Rav Chaim Vital asserts that negative traits can be even more detrimental than transgressions themselves. And this reinforces the importance of cultivating midot, character traits such as humility, kindness, patience. These are virtues that are indispensable for living in accordance with the divine will. For example, one of the Noahide laws forbids murder. But beyond the legal prohibition lies a deeper lesson, which is cultivating respect for human life and empathy for others. The narrative of Cain and Abel serves as more than a cautionary tale against violence. It's an instruction in moral conduct and the consequences of jealousy and anger. So, what is the chain of transmission from Mount Sinai to today? If we look in the Mishnah in Avot, chapter 1, Mishnah 1, we see a description of the chain of Torah transmission. It's very important that we understand this point fully, that the authenticity and the authority of Torah depends on the fact that we trust the people who have been commissioned to learn it and to teach it, all the way back to Moses. It says in the Mishnah over there, Moses received the Torah at Mount Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly, the Anshe Knesses Hagdolah, which is the precursor to the Sanhedrin, which operated during the existence of the holy temples. This is an unbroken line that continues from then till today, which emphasizes that the Torah that we study today is the same Torah given at Sinai that has been safeguarded by generations of scholars and leaders. The significance of this for Noahides cannot be overstated. As the Rambam clarifies in Hilchot Melachim, chapter 8, halacha 10, and we need to commit this to memory, it's one that we're going to come back to over and over again. He says, a Noahide who fulfills the 7 laws because God commanded them through Moses at Sinai is considered one of the Chasidei Umot HaOlam, the pious among the nations, and has a share in the world to come. This means that the Noahide laws are not merely ancient moral codes. They derive their authority from the revelation at Sinai and must be approached through the lens of Torah tradition. So Noahides are encouraged to seek guidance from Torah scholars and immerse themselves in Torah study in the sense of that those portions of Torah that apply to them. And this ensures that their observance of Torah law is rooted in authentic tradition and not subjective interpretation. In other words, the person who you learn from should have received it from somebody else, and that person from someone else, going all the way back to Moses. And this is what has gone on over history. The development of halacha, of Jewish law, of Torah law, I should say, because I'm speaking to people who are not Jewish, but who are nevertheless bound by it. This unfolded over centuries and across the world, shaped by historical necessity and divine inspiration. Halakha, which means the way or the path, reflects the evolving application of divine law to the changing circumstances of Jewish life. In other words, it's important to remember that for all intents and purposes, the observance of Torah was relatively limited to the Jews up until recent times, somewhat recent times, with pockets here and there of people who found themselves drawn closer to Hashem. Now, of course, being a diaspora and being constantly shifted from one part of the world to the other, circumstances changed. When I say that the application of divine law evolves to fit changing circumstances, I don't mean to suggest that the law itself changes. The application of the law changes depending on circumstances, which is why halakha is constantly being updated as new things happen, as new technologies become commonplace, as new medical procedures emerge. Contemporary halakha concerns itself with the ongoing application of Torah law to evolving circumstances. For Noahides, understanding this development reveals the depth of Torah authority and the process through which the seven laws are elucidated and applied. So, this is the oral law that we have to consider. We have three items which are considered to be essentially the same, but I'm going to explain the differences. Terms like Mishnah, Braita, and Tosefta. And this dates back to the 2nd century of the Common Era in the land of Israel. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who was known by his title Rabbeinu HaKadosh, our holy Rebbe, living under Roman rule in the Galilee, compiled the Mishnah in the town of Tzipori. And the reason why he did this, because it's supposed to be oral law. There is written law and then there is oral law. The written law is supposed to be written down. The oral law is supposed to be taught. Why did Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi finally write down and codify the oral law? Because of the circumstances of the time, which is to say that the Jews were being taken out of the land of Israel and forced into the diaspora. There was already a diaspora, and there was concern that if it just became completely atomized, that there would be no way to preserve the oral law, which is essential to the application of Torah. So he quoted a verse from the Psalms, Eit lasot lashem heferu Toratecha. It is a time to do for God, so we will overturn the Torah. How do we overturn the Torah? It was actually prohibited to write down the oral law. He overturned that in order to preserve its transmission throughout history. So the Mishnah serves as the foundational text of the oral Torah, organizing Torah law into 6 orders. Braita and Tosefta are essentially the same as Mishnah, but what Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi did was he sifted through various versions of the oral tradition in order to select what he thought was the most authoritative. And then the material that remained was collected in different volumes. So the Braita means outside material, Tosefta means additional material, but it's all Tanaitic Mishnah level material. These are supplementary collections that preserve teachings excluded from the Mishnah but remain authoritative in their own right. Now, the Mishnah is written down in very short, cryptic format, And reading it alone was enough to trigger the full understanding in early scholars who understood the explanation of the Mishnah. But what the Amoraim did, was the next generation of scholars, was essentially to click on the Mishnah like a hyperlink so that it expands, and the Talmud then becomes an explanation of the Mishnah. The Talmud is basically a transcript of the conversations that have gone on in the academies, the yeshivot, over several centuries with regard to the law that's contained in the Mishnah. So here we're talking about a period that spans from the year 200 to 500 of the Common Era, which took place in Babylonia and in the land of Israel. So following the redaction of the Mishnah, the Amoraim engaged in intensive analysis and debate over its meaning. So this discourse resulted in the compilation of two Talmuds. They're not really two Talmuds. I mean, they are, but all that means is that they were compiled in two separate locations. It's essentially the same material. Not always, and there are comparisons. They're both authoritative. But the Babylonian Talmud, which was completed around the 6th century, is more authoritative than the Jerusalem, the Yerushalmi, which was completed in the 5th century. Because the Babylonian Talmud was finalized in the great academies of Sura and Pumbedita. By this point in time in history, the center of Jewish life had shifted to Babylonia. And therefore, the center of scholarship did as well. And therefore, it becomes the dominant legal text because it's more comprehensive. There are several elements of the Jerusalem Talmud which have become lost over the years, which are retained in the Babylonian. And there's also there's also certain orders which are missing in the Babylonian Talmud, which we can find in the Yerushalmi, specifically the order of Zerayim, which relates to the agricultural laws that are relevant to the land of Israel. And of course, the prominence of the Babylonian Jewish community at this point in time drives us in the direction of the Babylonian Talmud. The next group are the Geonim. Here we're talking about a period that spans the 6th to the 11th centuries in Babylonia. The Geonim were the heads of the Babylonian yeshivas. They clarified difficult passages of the Talmud, and they responded to legal inquiries from Jewish communities around the world. So this era sees the emergence of what we call responsa literature, with Gaonic leaders such as Rav Sadia Gaon providing authoritative rulings in response to questions that are sent in. And their rulings laid the foundation for halachic practice for the following period, the medieval period of the Rishonim. Now, the Rishonim, which means the first ones, that spans the 11th through the 15th centuries, took place in Europe and North Africa. At this point in time, you had Jewish communities that were flourishing in Spain, France, and North Africa, with leading scholars such as Rashi, who was in France and Germany, the Rambam, who began in Spain and ended up in Egypt, and the Rif in North Africa. These all began codifying and interpreting the halakha. We have from this period, for example, the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, where he simplifies and systematizes Jewish law, offering a comprehensive guide to observance. He essentially paskind, he came out with a halachic decision for every law in the Talmud. There's no other halachic work like the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, because there are very few minds like the mind of Moses Maimonides. Rashi's commentary on the Talmud also indispensable for its clarity and its depth, and it facilitates the study of Talmud. Now, the next generation, as it were, I say generation, we're talking about generations that go for several centuries, were the Acharonim, which means the last ones. This is from the 16th century onward in both Eastern Europe, where most of the Jews who had at one point been in Western Europe were at this point. Ever wonder why you find Jews in Eastern Europe and they still have German last names? And that's because of the expulsions from the German-speaking countries as the Jews moved east, retaining their last names. So in the 16th century, Rabbi Yosef Karo authored the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is essentially the code of Jewish law. It follows an earlier work called the Arba Turim, where Jewish law is essentially divided up into four main sections. And this becomes the definitive halacha guide for the Sephardic communities in the world. The Sephardic communities are the communities whose practice follows the what we call the Spanish Rite. Sepharad is the word for Spain in Hebrew. While Ashkenazic Jews followed the notes on the Shulchan Aruch that were made by Rabbi Moshe Isserles, who's otherwise known as the Ramah. And when we say Ashkenazic Jews, we're talking about those who follow I guess what could be called the German Rite, but the German Rite itself, most of us follow an Eastern European version of that rite. Now, just an interesting note, why are there two types of Jews? Why are there Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazic Jews? That is rooted a bit earlier in the split between the communities in Jerusalem, in Eretz Israel, and in Babylonia. At least according to theory, what became the Sephardic diaspora is linked more closely to the communities in Babylonia, which then moved westward across the Middle East and into North Africa, and through North Africa into Spain. While the Ashkenazic Jews come from those people who had been taken out of the land of Israel during the 2nd century by the Romans on slave ships and brought to the Italian peninsula, and they made their way up from there into the Rhine River Valley, which is between France and Germany, excuse me. So that's how those two streams develop. Now, the Acharonim continued refining halacha through responsa and commentary and addressing contemporary challenges and ensuring that the relevance of Torah law remains in every generation. For Noahides, this timeline demonstrates the rigorous and sacred process by which Torah law is transmitted and developed. And it underscores the importance of consulting Torah scholars and aligning with established halachic rulings, even in the realm, or especially in the realm, of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach. The wisdom and guidance found in this tradition are vital to ensuring the proper observance of Noahide commandments and connecting them to the broader divine legal framework. We see also another Mishnah from Pirkei Avot, Yoshua ben Parachia. This is Mishnah number 6 in the first chapter. He says the following: Aseh lecha rav v'kaneh lecha chaver. Make for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a friend. What he's saying is that spiritual mentorship is necessary, but not just spiritual mentorship from rabbis, companionship with others who are connected to Torah as well. Meaning to say, we need fellow travelers on our journey to Torah observance. We see the Rabbi Burton, who was a commentator on the Mishnah, explains that acquiring a friend might even require financial investment. Meaning to say, if you need to hire somebody to teach you, because there's great value on creating a support network of mentors and peers. And for Noahides, this means building relationship with knowledgeable rabbis and like-minded individuals to foster their growth in Torah, understanding, and personal refinement. So what we've talked about is the fact that the Torah has sort of two subsections, law and narrative, which serves to remind us that divine commandments are not isolated from the broader human experience that is communicated in these stories. For Noahides, this unity between these two sections reinforces the importance of both legal observance and moral refinement. The stories of the Torah inspire our faith and they build our character, while the mitzvot guide our actions and instill discipline. By studying Torah, of course, where that's appropriate, Noahides have this opportunity to align themselves with a tradition that extends from Sinai to the present day. This connection provides not only a roadmap for righteous living, but also a profound sense of belonging to Hashem's unfolding plan for humanity.